Hi, this is Jonathan Clark, also known as DJ Bolivia, and you're watching another video in our Learn to DJ series. In this particular video, we're going to talk about how to set up a turntable. So I've brought in a guest speaker, Marc Carnes, who's going to talk about an industry standard, the Technics SL1200 turntable. So hopefully you learned something from the video and enjoy.
So when you open up your box, the first thing you're going to get is this big old honking piece of thing. This, once you take out the static foam packing, is your cover. It's your dust cover. When you're not using your turntables, you always put your dust cover on your turntables. This is for the sole fact of keeping the dust off your turntables and therefore keeping your components clean and maintaining your motor pretty strong. So they break easily, so sort of stick them off to the side when you're not using, but always put them back on when you're done. With most Technics brand new ones you get complimentary slip mats. They're really cheap foam board type stuff. These are Technics because we bought Technics turntables. They also come with these little slip mats. These are basically a tracking mat, so when you have your platter, which is the thing that goes around the turntable, if you want, you can slip this down and then this on top. This is really slippery, so it allows for a lot quicker, easier cueing. Once you play with them for about a week, you get rid of them because they get really annoying. Most DJs don't use them, but you do get them with the set. This is your foam board fiber slip mat. There are different types of slip mats that you can buy depending on your use. The ones Technics put on their turntables are very general use. You don't use them to stick with them. They're fairly thin, but they're very hard. So they're pretty slippery because they are hard and thin. But depending on what you want to do with your slip mats. Turntablists will use a thinner slip mat. It's a bit softer, it'll slide a little bit smoother, and it won't slide too fast that they lose control of your cueing when they're scratching. A lot of DJs that do a lot of beat matching, your 4/4 DJs, 4/4 beats, anybody that does a lot of beat matching, a lot of club DJs will go with a slightly thicker slip mat. It's a bit softer as well, because you're not really working so much on cueing. You want something that's going to keep a good track on the record and maintain a good spin. So these ones are decent if you don't have anything, but for about $30 Canadian you can upgrade to a nicer quality one that will last you a bit longer. One of the things you're looking for in a slip mat is the center hole. The stronger it is, the longer it'll last. Every time you find when you're back cueing like that, any pressure back and forth will sort of spread out the hole from the nipple on the platter, and by doing that you'll tear out the hole, which means it slides more on the platter and doesn't give you as easy, the cueing isn't as easily done. So they're good for starters, but if you can buy new ones, I recommend it. So to get into the sort of the core of your box, you have these rubber mats which come. They flop down on the platter itself as well. They're more for just playing a record like your parents would, like an old school record player. You don't put these on really when you're trying to cue. They add a lot of weight to the platter, so it makes it harder to move them back and forth, and it's rubber sticky. So you don't get that easy. It defeats the purpose of a slip mat because it won't slide as well against it as it will against the plastic surface of the platter. So these usually make really nice big beer coasters or something. Cardboard. So into the meat of the whole thing. This is your platter. That's what I've been talking about. Comes in a big old plastic bag. It's big, it's metal, it's very, very heavy. There's instructions on it. Really heed the instructions very, very well. Keeps you from destroying your components of your turntable. Try to keep some dust off of it. So for right now, we're just going to put it over here, cover it up with a plastic bag. In the foam core of your turntable section, you'll get a bunch of different things taped in. Right here in this section right here was where the headshell was stored before I took it out to assemble the headshell. This piece right here, to be honest, I have no idea what it does. If anybody can figure out what this is, let me know. You're also going to find taped in here this is your counterweight. It goes on the back end of your tone arm. I'll show how to put that on in a little bit. you're also going to find what you get with every turntable is a grounding post. Now the grounding post actually goes into the back of your mixer, but Technics supplies you with a spare one, because if you don't have a grounding post, it's very hard to ground your turntable, which means you can't get any proper sound reproduction of your turntable. But I'll talk about grounding posts in a little while. So now I get into the money section of it all. Very carefully pull the plastic bag off so you don't rip off the tone arm while you're at it. This little tag, it tells you that when the light is down, it's not on. There's a light post here. When you push this button, the post pops up, a light comes on, and it helps to give you light on your record, so you can see your grooves a lot better. This piece right here comes with every turntable. What it is it slips over when you have your platter assembled. It's over the nipple like this, and it sits. It acts as an extra large center, so you can put the old school 45s on, which have the really big holes in the center. Some independent record companies and independent producers still make 45s, which is a single track. It's about 7 inches in diameter. It's 7 inches in diameter. And this keeps it centered on the record player, so it'll play without going all over the place. Just gonna put it out of the way for right now. So I'm gonna start from the bottom of the turntable. On the turntable, you have your plug, your port for your electrical plug, and your port for your phono cable, which also has the ground wire included. You have 4 feet. Now the 4 feet, as you can see, move. What this does is allow for the turntable to adapt to an uneven surface. So if your table that you're set up on isn't 100% perfect, it will move a little bit to maintain that your record player is flat. When you're using a record player or turntable, you've got to make sure that it is level, completely level, because any variation in either left or right or back and forth could affect the movement of the record and how it interacts with the needle. So if you're off a little bit, it could either mean that the needle just skip right off the record if it's really severe, or in smaller cases, it will just be affected a lot more by bass or vibrations in the deck. So if you're in a situation with a lot of bass or a lot of movement close to the deck, and it's not 100% level, you're dealing with a less than ideal situation, and it's possible that the needle will skip a lot more off your record. Especially different types of records. Some records have really, really deep, thick grooves, and some have really thin grooves. The ones with the very thin, narrow, shallow grooves will skip a lot easier. So the more ideal your situation is for your turntable, the better off you are in the end. So also included with these feet is they're actually height adjustable. Again, same thing, if you don't have a perfectly level surface you're working on, you can adjust the height of the feet to make sure the turntable actually does wind up level. So for now I'm just going to screw them all the way down, so that we know they're all the way down, assuming that the rest of the room is level, even though I'm sitting on a bed. So I flip this back over, and then under the back we have our electrical plug. It's an electrical plug. They exist everywhere in the world. If you can't use one of these, get out of DJing. So that will go into plugging into your outlet. This is your phono cord, with basically an RCA cable, a stereo RCA cable with a left and a right, and a ground cable. Now the reason why turntables have a ground cable is because there's an immense amount of static electricity that's built up with a motor that's rotating back around, and also with a lot of felt, and any motion, static motion or friction motion cause static between the records and the felt. You're dealing with vinyl, which is wax, which is not much different than a rubber, and if you rub a balloon against your head, you get static. So any type of material like a wax or vinyl, PVC, if you've ever used plumbing PVC for anything in the world, you'll find you get a static buildup due to electronic charges. Talk to a chemist or physicist about the breakdown of it. But ultimately, you're going to get static buildup in your turntable. So this helps by plugging into the back of your mixer, it basically grounds out any static charges coming through here. If you don't plug this in, and you have a record on here, and this is plugged into your mixer, which is plugged into a sound system, and you pull your record off, it sends a static charge through your RCA cables, and you hear a crackle in your sound system. If you don't have a ground cable as well plugged into the back of your mixer, the sound itself coming through the RCA cables into your mixer is going to have what's called a ground hum. It's a sort of a low end, just sort of goes and it's very, very predominant in your music, especially if you have anything with a break in it, like especially in something like trance, which is very quiet and long breaks into it. The hum will be predominant, and it's very, very poor quality. It sounds bad, especially if you're doing a recording. So the ground cable must always be plugged into the back of your mixer to the grounding port, which, as I already said earlier, has a grounding post in the back of your mixer. So at some point, at some place back in your mixer, you'll take your grounding post, you put this underneath your grounding post and screw it into your mixer. We can show you that later when we talk about mixers. The other reason why, it's a phono as opposed to a line, if you look on any DJ mixers, there's a phono switch and a line switch. You always plug your turntable into a phono. Now the reason why you plug a turntable into a phono is because the turntables do not have a preamp. Now a preamp is basically, it's a miniature amplifier inside the component, which amplifies the signal being read off the record and sends it through. Since there is no preamp here, the bumps on the record are getting transferred electronically into your stylus, through your cartridge, into your tone arm, and out your RCA, and right into your mixer. So it's a very, very basic low frequency. There's not much juice behind it. Whereas if you look at a CD player or anything considered a line input, CD player, mini disc, they have a preamp built into the CD player or the mini disc, which basically means that it amplifies the signal being read by the laser and sends it out at a higher frequency to your mixer. So if you switch on to, when you plug in a turntable into the back of your mixer and switch it onto a line, you're going to get basically no signal. If you plugged your turntable into a line input on a mixer, you basically get no signal. You have to plug it into your phono, and then flip your mixer into a phono position, and that basically activates a small little preamp in your mixer to boost the signal enough so that it can process it and send it out to your sound system at a high enough level to be audible and good enough quality.
And that's why if you ever plug a CD player into the phono, all
it's
of a sudden
freaking loud.
Yeah.
It's just a complete surge of the system. So you always plug your CD players, mini disc players, or whatever you want to use, computers, in as a line input, and your turntables are always considered a phono input. And the reason why is because of the preamp. So at the top of your turntable, this is without the platter, this is what's underneath. As you can see in here, there's ventilation, and you can see all the components inside. You don't want to touch them, you don't want to stick a fork in there, you don't want to do anything, you want to keep that covered and dust free. Which is why once you put your platter on top, you should never have to take your platter off unless it's servicing. Now, 99% of DJs out there probably don't know how to service their turntables properly, so if you don't know how to do it, don't do it. They're very, very easy to break and very easy to mess up. So always send your turntable to a qualified technician. This is a nipple, what they call a nipple, for obvious reasons. It's connected to the motor, the drive motor underneath. This is a direct drive turntable, which means that it's basically using magnetic forces to propel the platter around and around. If you have a belt-driven turntable, it's basically physically driven by a belt. It's no different than a VCR. The problem with a belt is they stretch, they get old, and they're not very conducive to messing around with your hands because it's a belt drive. It's almost the same as your car. It wants to go in one direction. Whereas a direct drive, it's freer flowing and it will pick up better when you let go. It has a stronger motor to it. So otherwise on here we've got a power switch on off. Now on this MD3 it has metal binding ring around it. What that does is protects the DJ from accidentally bumping it with his wrist when he's playing with the record and turning off the record player, which is a very, very common occurrence. As a promoter, what I found one of the most beneficial things you can ever do, if you don't have an MD3, say you have a Mark II or a Gemini or a Stanton or a Vestax or any other kind of turntable that doesn't have this post, all it is basically this little switch unprotected. So what I always do is take a piece of electrical tape and tape over it after it's been turned on. Once you turn your turntable on, there's really no need to turn it off until you're done for the night. So if you tape over that, there's no chance you're actually accidentally knocking the power switch and turning it off. This is your start button. Kind of does what it says. This is your 33 and 45 switch. This is 33 revolutions per minute. This is 45 revolutions per minute. Certain records are recorded at different lengths. At a slower revolution, you can get more grooves onto a record. Any of the old records that, for instance, my parents would have listened to, not like non-dance records, but things that are sort of meant to hold an entire album, where you have side A inside B, and side A is half your record, or half your album, and side B is the other half your album. A lot of them are recorded in 33. Because of the slower revolution, they can get the grooves a lot tighter, therefore compress a lot more music onto each side. When I was talking earlier about the 45s, where you use this jobby over the nipple, they're 45 because they revolve at 45 RPMs, revolutions per minute. So usually you have one track per side on the 45s. With a lot of dance tracks now, they do a lot of the tracks will use a 45 as well, because they can thicken out the grooves and make a single track per side, which basically means you're paying, say, $15 Canadian for 2 songs as a minimum, whereas our parents would have paid $5 for 13 songs on an LP. This is the light, as I was talking about earlier. It goes down, it's spring loaded, you push the button, it pops right back up automatically. This is the tone arm itself. The tone arm has a lot of different functions. I'll take this off here. Take out this block. This is the lift arm. As you can see, when I lift the lift arm, it actually lifts this piece here up and down. What that does is, when the arm is out, if I lift it, it lifts the arm up off the record and back down onto the record. And when you notice when you push it down, it slowly eases it back down. So basically what you do when you're done with your tone arm is you put it back on the resting holster here, you lock it, and you make sure your tone arm is up. So that means that when your turntable is turned off, nobody can come along and accidentally, if you forget to lock it for whatever reason, and they knock it, it's not going to fall down on a record if it's sitting there, because it's up. It won't fall onto the record until you put it down. So when you're always turning your turntables off, bring the tone arm up, lock it into place.
And that's hydraulic, so you don't actually have to have it plugged in to make it work. No,
I don't have to turn it right now. It's just basically a grease-loaded system. Up here they have a thing called anti-skating. Basically what anti-skating does is allows a side-to-side motion in the tone arm. When it's reading some records, a lot of records aren't necessarily cut perfectly circular, which means not 100%. The hole in the center of the record is not always cut directly 100% in the center of the record. So there might be a little bit of motion back and forth when you look at the record. What the anti-skating does is allow for a little more free motion. If you have zero anti-skating, it's more just back and forth. But if you have it all the way up, it'll allow for a little bit more motion, a little more forgiveness on your record. Every time, depending on the situation where you're using your turntables, every location is different, every setup is different. So if you're just setting up your turntables in your room to use as a basic everyday thing, set it up exactly the way you want in your room. You should never really have to touch it unless you move location. Something as simple as a little bit of difference in the level of the turntable or the style of record can affect your skating. Also depending on whether you're using the turntable for scratching or just straight beat matching. Also, if you can see on here, there's a lock button, and there's a 0 through 6 millimeter dash marks all the way around here. Now these dash marks actually represent a vertical raise in the tone arm. So by unlocking this lock, which I've just done, I can now physically turn this little ring, this rubber ring below the tone arm, and it'll actually raise or lower the tone arm. So what you're trying to do basically is you're trying to aim for your tone arm to be more or less level with the record, so there's no downward pressure on it. That the stylus, the tip of the stylus is actually riding as flat and in line with the record as possible. So depending on the type of record, of how you set up your slip mats, how thick your slip mats are, you can raise or lower the tone arm to adjust for that by as much as 6 millimeters, because your slip mats could be fairly thick. So if your slip mats are thicker, you raise your tone arm a bit so that it maintains sort of that flat, easy motion around the record. Once you sort of set a height that you would thick. So if your slip mats are thicker, you raise your tone arm a bit so that it maintains sort of that flat, easy motion around the record. Once you sort of set the height that you want, you lock it down. But you don't set that until you install the rest of the platter and the turntable. Finally, there's the pitch adjustment. Now, the pitch adjustment fader on Technics go from 0, which is the green light. When you're plugged in, the green light will light up, to +8 or -8. So that's +8% of the speed of your record. So if it's 100 beats per minute, your record, and you go +8, it'll max out at 108 beats per minute. The nice thing about the M3Ds on these Techniques that we're using right here is there's no quartz lock in the center. What quartz lock means is when you're sliding up and down, at 0 it will lock in, right at 0, and you'll actually feel and hear a physical click. Now the M3Ds don't have that physical click, so it makes for a much smoother transition. When you're beat matching, sometimes you might get it's not quite 0, just slightly bigger than that. That's a very weak part in the pitch adjustment fader. So A, it wears on the life of your fader when you have to go through that click all the time, and B, because it wears on your fader, it won't maintain its speed as well. So you have a bit more trouble controlling the speed of your record, which means it may vary a little bit here, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, and when you're trying to beat match, that can throw off your beat match. The older the turntable gets, the weaker the lock gets, the more problems you have. So the M3Ds, what they've done is they've gotten rid of that quartz lock, which means it's a very smooth transition to and from, which ideally means that your fader will last longer and you don't have to fight with that center neutral point. A lot of times for a beginning DJ, the quartz lock might actually help them out because they can physically feel and hear when they've got their record back to 0. A lot of DJs will find when they're just starting out, it's easier to start from 0 and then to figure out where they have to speed the record up or slow it down. With more advanced DJ, they don't really care about the quartz lock so much because they're more concentrated on the beat, which they can hear in their head. They don't have to think about the record as much. So the 0.5 of a beat per second that it might throw you off isn't there. So it makes it a little bit easier to make your beat matching. Now, one feature they do have with the M3Ds is they have a reset. By throwing this reset button on, it basically resets the quartz lock speed. It basically it acts in the quartz lock so that it locks it in at 0. It'll reset your record back to 0, like 0 on the pitch fader. Whether your pitch fader's up here or not, it'll set it back to what that 0 should be. So it's sort of an automatic reset if you need to use it for whatever reason. So sort of getting back to the whole quartz lock idea on any other turntable but the 3D. There is a 0 point, and it's basically you actually almost physically push it out of its little valley in the pitch fader that locks it into place. So you have to push it out. So it's almost like being on the edge of a cliff. If your fader is just off 0 and it's sort of not quite out of 0 position, it's sort of on its way to being sped up. It's almost like on the edge of a cliff, where you're not quite over the edge, but you're not quite back on solid ground. So it's a little bit of teetering. You don't really know exactly which way you're going to go. It's very much it's an adjustment factor for the motor that's a lot harder to do because it's sort of not in its resting position, its natural resting position, sort of in a position somewhere in between. It's hard on the motor and it slows down the life or lowers the life of your fader. I have the 1200 Mark IIIs myself, or Mark IIs, and what I want to do, the big difference between an M3D and a Mark II or a lot of other turntables out there, aside from this quartz lock or the smooth motion pitch fader, is that on the M3Ds they've taken a little bit of weight off of the platter, and so the motor's not quite as fast or not quite as strong. Whereas on the Mark IIs, the motor is stronger, but you have a problem with the M3Ds or with the fader and the quartz lock. So what I am currently in the process of doing, and what a lot of users are finding now to be very handy, is to go with the stronger motor in the Mark II and to replace the actual pitch fader in the Mark II with the M3D fader. So then you sort of have the best of both worlds. Techniques are known as being the industry standard as far as DJ tables because the motor is uncompromisingly strong. It will maintain its integrity, maintain its strength for years and years and years and years without tune-ups, and if you do tune them up, they'll last even longer. Some of the other models on the market, the motors aren't quite as strong, the torque isn't as high, so the response of the table isn't quite as fast as it might be with the Technics, which is why most DJs prefer the Technics. Again, it's definitely a personal preference. Some DJs won't learn on Technics and they'll never use them. It's definitely a way of preference, much like anything else you're going to do with your turntables, as far as slip mats go, as far as cartridges go, as far as stylus go. Everything is very much a personal preference, personal choice, and one DJ could say one thing that sounds completely ridiculous to somebody else, but it may work for that person and their style of DJing. Go ahead and put the platter on. And the platter is basically just a magnetic lock on it. So you turn it upside right. And it says on here, caution, use utmost care when handling the platter and when placing it on the motor shaft to prevent possible damage to the magnet. So basically part of what they're saying is don't just drop it on there, because you can damage the motor shaft. You don't want to bend this at all. If you ever bend this, you're completely screwed and your turntable is pretty much useless. So be very, very careful when you're putting your platter on. Secondly, it says do not connect the AC power plug unless the platter is installed to the motor shaft. If you turn the plug on right now, there's a magnet in there. It's going to start drawing in dirt. It actually creates electrical charge in here. So if you had this open like this, you could create a short and, well, electrocute yourself, as well as short out the motor. And it says never let dust or iron filings come in contact with the rotor magnet, for obvious reasons. You don't let anything come in touch with the magnets, because it will basically dirty them up, slow down the motor, and potentially burn out your motor. And finally, do not remove the platter unnecessarily. If you don't need to, don't touch it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So basically what you do is you line up the nipple in the hole on the platter, you drop it down, spin it a couple of times, make sure it's locked, and the platter's on. And just to make sure that you got a good lock on the magnet, you shouldn't be able to just easily pull off the platter. It should go down and maintain a fairly good grip to it. So that if you did this, your platter's not going to fall off. So now you have your platter on. Take your slip mat and you put it down. And then you're ready to go. Nice and smooth. This is where a lot of the static friction is built up. When you're queuing up your record, you're doing a lot of this. There's a lot of static work going on there, which is why the ground wire is there, to help channel all that static electricity down so it doesn't short out your system. And it gets rid of any unnecessary hum. While I'm sitting here too, take this cartridge that we assembled earlier. Actually leave the condom on. And all you really need to do is you'll see this little gadget here. If you pull it back, you'll see on top there's a little slice in the circle, and on the bottom there's a little slice in the circle. And if you look at the head shell, you'll see a little divot right there. So what you do is you line up your little divot with your needle facing down. You push it in as far as it'll go without shoving it, and then you just screw it on. So now we put our cartridge on. This is the Shure M35S. Each cartridge assembly has a different weight to it, each different model. So you've got to balance according to that weight. Now in the books they give you a really long mathematical way of doing it, which I never really figured out. I'm not that smart. So there's a pretty easy way of doing it, sort of the layman's way of doing it. It's a pretty fast way of doing it. Is you take your counterweight, which you found in your box assembly, and you're going to shove it with the numbers facing the shaft of the tone arm. You shove it on, you spin it, there you go, and it'll slide right into a certain point where it sits rest and locked. So at its neutral position. Then you're going to spin this out piece back until 0 is in line, this line along the shaft of the tone arm. And then you're going to start spinning. Spinning back, holding this, not the front, but holding the back rubber piece. And you're going to go in a couple of turns, and then what you do is take your cartridge out, unlock your tone arm, lower it, so you're gonna, as if you're gonna drop it down on a record, and look at it and see if it falls. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna loosen it off until you get a float in your tone arm. So as you adjust it, you'll get to a point where seesaw, you'll have an equilibrium. So basically that means that there is no more weight pulling it up as there is pushing it down onto the record. So by all accounts, you found that weight balance now, and you choose to turn it ahead. A gram or two.
So it's just a little bit heavy in the nose.
Yeah, it's heavy enough so it'll fall down on the record and not skip off. Now, by trial and error, you will figure out when you're backtracking. If you're backtracking on your record and the cartridge is flying off, add a little bit more weight. So I found with using my Shores that when I put this on originally, I got to that lock position. You set it to 0. And I found with my Shores in specific, I get to 2 rotations and then to a 3, to the 3 gram position. And that's enough weight to keep it down on my record. Now you can move it a bit more if you want. Now there's mathematical ways of doing it. Read your instructions very, very carefully and do it that way. I find for most of my practical purposes, this is the way I really need to do it. It works out for me. It keeps my records tracking well. It's a lot of trial and error. A lot of DJs, when they first figure it out, they figure, oh, all I have to do is put on my head shell and just crank this sucker all the way on and drop it down. But now you've put the most possible weight you can in this system down on your records. So the more weight you have on it, the harder it is on your records. So if you back it off to a balance point, somewhere around there, and then push it on a couple of grams, then you know you've got more than enough weight on your records without causing any permanent damage to them. But as I said, if you read your instruction manual a lot more, you'll probably come up with a better way for it yourself. But I find this works fine for me, and I've never had any complaints or problems from anybody else. Okay, so now we've brought our turntable out to where we're going to set it up with the mixer. Well, the simplest to do, make sure your thing is locked, your arm is up. We're going to go ahead and plug it in to where we need to plug it in. I'm taking the RCA cord, or in turntable terms, the phono cord, as well as the grounding wire out. I've opted to choose, on the back of this mixer, phono 1 input. Now, as earlier, you have to use the phono because there's no preamp in the turntables. The phono 1 has a built-in preamp in the mixer. If I used it into line, I wouldn't get enough signal and it'd be very poor quality. So I plug in, by default, red with red, white with white. I take this is the grounding post here that I was talking about earlier. Most mixers will have their own. If you lose one, that's why Technics gives you another one. But you loosen it up, you take the horseshoe connector, and you just slide it in the back, wrap it around the post, and then tighten the post until it screws down. So putting a bottle cap back on a bottle. So you tighten back on, then you secure. The thing you might want to do too is just sort of make sure that your grounding cable is sort of not touching any of the other inputs, just in case there's any ground fusion or whatever that they actually end up touching and you get any feedback loop or any grounding problems in your turntable. Make sure it's just clean and clear of itself. If you have another turntable, you're just going to plug it into the same grounding post. Just plug them in both at the same time. The next thing you want to do is you want to plug in your turntable. Just like that. Now that I've plugged it in, I can turn this on. And the reason why this post is up here is to protect again, accidentally bumping into the switch and turning it off by mistake. If you look over here on the Mark II, the on-off switch isn't protected, so it's very easy just to accidentally rub with your hand and turn it off and on. So if you're mixing, got a great mix going, you pull your hand back, you can actually turn off your turntable. This way it's protected. If you want to be absolutely sure, just take a piece of electrical tape and put it over top, and that way there's no way in hell you can actually possibly spin it on or off. So I turn it on. If you push this button on, up comes a light and it turns on. So if I take a record off the shelf, use Chemical Brothers. You loosen tone arm, or you loosen your arm lock, and you take off your condom and make sure it's out of the way. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just put the condom in here so you can't lose it. Put that down. You drop your tone arm. Hit start. Now I'm just checking to make sure I have a left and right channel, that I'm getting both left and right coming through the tone arm, which I do. So I know it's clean. Quality's there for sound. Now a good way of checking is to backtrack. It's not skipping too bad. It's not bumping around. It's maintaining itself pretty well. I can increase the anti-skidding a little bit. I like to let mine float around 1.5 to give a little bit of play. If you see, if I open the anti-skidding up more, you can't tell this record, but the anti-skidding would allow the tone arm to play a little more if you had to. But I loosen it down, just a little bit of skating, so it will float back and forth. If I take a look now from this side, I can see that the height is pretty good. It's not too high, there's not too much down pressure on this way. It's standing pretty clean. And from right now, the weight looks pretty good. Now I can try it if I want. I can back it off a little bit more and see how well it lays down. It's alright, but you see how it skips off a little bit more. If I put the red in the middle, it skips a lot. If I put a little bit more weight, say 0.5 gram, and I backtrack, it doesn't skip nearly as much. So I know there's a good grasp, there's a good weight on the record. It's not going to fly off the handle every time I touch it, which also means that on the event of a little bit of push pressure, it's not going to cause the arm to skip too much. So as of right now, for the setting that I'm in right now, I'm happy with my setup. So if you look at the pitch control, it's quite simple. +8 means you're speeding up the record. -8 means you're slowing down the record. And back to 0. Now, the feature with the M3D is this reset button. If I'm all the way up at +8, I can hit reset, light comes on, and it slows down the record. It actually turns off the pitch control. There's no more speeding up, no more slowing down. It's back to 0 no matter where I am. And it slows it back down. So that's all it is. It just resets. The reset actually gets it back. The ports locks into 0 no matter where you are. If you look here at the side of the rims of the platter, you'll see these series of dots. The center one here, the biggest dots, if they're fixed and not moving at all, then it means you're at 0%, which means you're at flat on the actual pitch fader. If you speed up, once you get to the next bar of light here, up 1, if you see me speed up the record, then the center one starts to move, and the next line starts to slow down. Once I got that next line, those dots completely in position. Then it shows that I've actually managed to speed it up to 3.3% of the actual pitch fader. And if we do it once more, those ones will start moving again, and the top ring will stop from moving around. And that means I'm at +6% of the pitch fader. And if you look over here, on the pitch fader itself, I'm at +6%. So without actually using the pitch fader, and just by looking at the actual rings on the platter, you can actually tell how fast the record is going. If I wanted to slow it down to -3%, then this bottom ring here will actually stop moving. There, I'm at minus 3.3% right now. And if you look over the pitch fader, I'm at minus 3%. So by managing to not look at this, I can see where my record's laying as far as speed goes. And that's it.